Hi guys. This is The Unspoken. This story is all about when Carlisle has had it with the children's constant bickering, so he sends the Cullens to family therapy. Suicidal Edward, Bella's fear of commitment, Alice addicted to shopping, Rosalie's hostility, Emmett, and Jasper's gambling. Who will survive? Before we start, kindly like and subscribe to this channel and look over the description box for the author of this amazing storyline. Welcome aboard. Family Therapy, Cullen Style Part 1. Quit your bickering, Carlisle's POV. It had been a long day at the hospital. I had not seen the sun all day long. It had yet to rise when I left this morning and had already set as I slowly walked out of the hospital. With darkness all round me, I saw the lights of my home dancing in the distance. The car glided into the garage, and I hurried into the house, anxious to see my wife. There was nothing I liked more at the end of a long day than to spend some quiet time with her. Images of her smiling face filled my head as I threw open the door to the house. I didn't get another word out before I was verbally attacked by my loving family. Carlisle, look what the boys did to my wall. Again. Esme was pointing at a huge, Emmett-shaped dent in the wall. She had just got done repainting the kitchen from the flying frying pan incident the night before. Emmett is the most inconsiderate person I have ever met, Edward huffed. Emmett no doubt had made another off-color comment about Bella. Jasper keeps messing with my emotions. It's not my fault. Emmett whined. Of course, Jasper got bored and manipulated Emmett into saying something stupid, and Edward overreacted as always. Oh Edward, just because you can't control your temper doesn't mean it's Jasper's fault. Take some personal responsibility. Alice chimed in, protecting her husband, even though she knew he was, in fact, to blame. Well, if your husband would stop getting mine in trouble, I would appreciate it, Alice. And you and your little girlfriend need to get some thicker skin, Rosalie hissed as she pointed her finger at Edward and Bella. She still refused to accept Bella as a part of this family, and of course she was the only one allowed to constantly manipulate Emmett's fragile emotional state. Hi Carlisle. How was your day? Bella asked sheepishly from the couch. Why is the human the only sensible one? You would think that with all of our years of experience we would at the least be able to begin to master the most important relationships in our lives. Hello Bella. My day was terrible, thanks for asking. As for the rest of you, I want to have a family meeting right now. Bella, would you please join us? I smiled at her, but turned to glare at the rest of them as they all silently walked over to the dining room table. When everyone was seated, I took my spot at the head of the table. Normally I would sit, but I was too irritated, and so I began pacing behind the chair as I tried to figure out what we should do to fix this situation. They all waited patiently and gave me a moment with my thoughts. This type of welcome home had become increasingly routine. I would walk through the door, only to see the boys wrestling around on the floor, a wake of damage to Esme's house all around them. Or the girls would be bickering about one thing or another. Things like this happened when people lived together for decades. It was somewhat normal, but the fact they continued to fight over the same ridiculous things was starting to wear on my patience. It had to stop, and I made my decision about how we would proceed. They would hate it, and I wasn't sure it would work, but there were some issues that needed to be addressed by this family, and I saw this as the safest way to proceed. They would all be forced to be on their best behavior, and who knows, it just might work, or at the very least, annoy them into behaving better. Get out of my head Edward, you'll find out when they do. And you will not like my decision, but you and Bella will go along with it without complaint. Edward nodded apologetically, knowing he had been caught. That boy just hated to wait like the rest of them. Then Alice groaned. She obviously saw my decision now that it was made. Enough from you, Alice. I responded to her glaring eyes with raised eyebrows. She clenched her jaw and quieted down. So thank you all for coming to this meeting. I wanted to talk to you all about some of the things that have been going on around here lately. I started calmly. I saw Edward roll his eyes, Emmett pointed at Jasper and Rosalie shot a nasty look Bella's way. Perfect start. My open-minded vampire. Over the last few weeks, I have noticed the arguing around here has really increased. The fights are happening daily and the verbal attacks on each other, and to our guests, I gave Bella a knot of turned more vicious than ever. I am not blaming anyone in particular, Emmett coughed Jasper's name causing Alice to smack him. I crossed my arms and waited for their attention. When they realized I was watching, they looked solemnly down at the table. This is just one of those things that can happen to our kind when you spend every minute of the day together for several decades. I don't want anyone to leave or go live on their own for a while. I don't feel that is the best thing to do in this situation. I have another suggestion that I would like the family to try, and when I say family, I'm including you in that, Bella. Her eyes got wide, and a nervous smile played on her face. Of course, Rosalie rolled her eyes at me calling Bella family, but she was as much a part of this family as any of us, even if she was human. Here's where things would get sticky. I took a deep breath and said, as head of this house, I am making an executive decision. We are all going to family therapy. Edward slammed his hand on the table and started talking so fast under his breath, I simply ignored him. Rosalie continued filing her nails, completely ignoring me. Emmett scoffed at the suggestion. While I could feel Jasper's confusion from across the table, Alice still had her jaw set and refused to look at me. My eyes immediately went to Esmes. She would be the voice of reason. She would see why this was necessary. Do you really think that's a good idea, Carlisle? She asked tentatively, looking around the room at the children's reactions. And are there really vampire family therapists? Well, no, but a new human family therapist just joined on at the hospital, and I think he may be able to help us. I had lunch with him a few times and I have heard he is very good. I think you all would like Dr. Dover. He's young and he has a lot of fresh ideas. He might be able to help us. Bella looked over at Edward, who had assumed his uber-stressed pose with his fingers pinching the bridge of his nose, before she spoke. I'll go, Carlisle, if you think it will help everyone. Her voice was so timid, but I knew she was a stubborn girl, and when she made a decision she stuck with it, which meant Edward was now in, whether he liked it or not. He'd never let Bella do this alone. I smiled. Looks like you'll be joining us, son. I am so happy. Edward glanced at me and then quickly went to work on Bella, since he realized they were a package deal. Bella, you do not have to go to therapy with my family. Bella, you do not have to go to therapy with my family. Just because they all have mental issues doesn't mean you have to endure this kind of punishment. This coming from our suicidal brother. Edward, if anyone need to be there, it is you. We have all put up with your self-hatred, your anger issues and now your new stalkerish tendencies for over half a century. Rosalie spat at him. Edward rose to his feet, but Bella clutched his arm. He glanced down at her, and she simply said, "Please, sit down, Edward." And he listened. She really was the best thing that ever happened to him. Rosalie is right. Why do we have to go to therapy if Edward's the one with all the issues? Make him go, and when he's normal, everything will be better. Emmett bellowed. I held up my hands to make them stop. Listen, if you want me to go around the room and tell you why I think you need therapy, fine. Edward, well, you know why, Rose just told you. Edward growled in Rosalie's direction. Bella placed a supportive hand on his shoulder. Jasper, with power comes responsibility. Feeling our emotions is something you may not be able to control, but manipulating them for your own enjoyment is quite another, and you do it all the time now, like it's some sort of sick compulsion. Not to mention the fact that your lack of control almost ended Bella's life. Maybe you should focus a little more on your own emotional state instead of everyone else's. Alice, you also manipulate and meddle in things that aren't your business. Bella and Edward's future is just that, their future. Let people make their own mistakes. Quit trying to be the controlling power of the universe. People make mistakes, that is how they learn. You need to admit that your shopping addiction has gotten out of control. You are masking your problems instead of learning to deal with them. And why on earth do you care so much what Bella's clothes look like? She is a real person, Alice. You have to let her be who she is. She is not your personal Barbie doll. Alice looked sheepishly down at the floor. Rosalie, for some reason you have an issue with Bella, and though you make no secret about it, the big secret is why that is. Are you jealous? Do you need to be the center of attention that badly? I have tried to talk to you about it at length, as well as every other member of the family, and you refuse to budge. Bella is going to be a part of this family and you need to open up to that idea. Edward loves her. I know you see that, now accept it. Rosalie shot rays of death at me with her eyes. Emmett, you need to be more considerate of everyone. No one likes someone who constantly makes them the brunt of their jokes. You enjoy making others feel uncomfortable. It has become a game for you to embarrass Edward and Bella on a daily basis. You know it never ends well, yet you continue. Why do you feel the necessity to always be the funny guy? What insecurities are you hiding behind the laughter? Emmett's head bowed down in surrender. Esmond, I have tried everything we can think of, but now I feel it is time we seek professional help. I am not expecting any of you to enjoy this, but I am expecting you to respect my opinion and participate. Are we clear? I asked. As I surveyed the room, I saw Esm nod supportively. Alice and Jasper exchanged a look and gave a small smile. Edward rolled his eyes, but Bella had already agreed to go, so he was in like it or not. Rosalie muttered fine under her breath, and Emmett gave me the thumbs up, so they all had agreed, grudgingly. Thank you all for agreeing. Now I do have some ground rules for our therapy sessions that I would like you all to abide by. The doctor is human, so obviously keep our secret, but please be as honest with him as possible. That's the only way he can help. And it would make life a bit easier for Esm and I if we kept the fact that Alice and Jasper and you and Rosalie are married to ourselves, I said as I eyed Emmett. What? You don't want Dr. Dover knowing you let your kids shack up under your roof, Dad? Emmett jabbed, playfully with a big grin on his face. Yes, Emmett, I would prefer that stay between us. If possible. Knowing Emmett and Edward's tempers, I assumed one of them would let it slip, and if I had to guess, I'd guess Emmett would be the one, so spill the beans, so to speak. I will make some phone calls and see how soon I can get us in to see the doctor. Edward, it's getting late, Bella needs to get home. He gave me a nod and took Bella by the hand. Good night, Carlyle. Bella said as she came over and gave me a goodbye hug. Goodbye, Bella, thank you for listening and for your help with Edward. I laughed, there was no point in whispering, Edward would hear me anyway. This should be interesting, she giggled. You have no idea, I couldn't help but laugh myself. Did I really just suggest 7 vampires and 1 human go to family therapy? This was going to be a wild ride. It had been 10 days since I suggested we all go to family therapy, and things had gotten a little bit better between the kids, but that was because most of them weren't actually speaking to one another. Edward and Rosalie refused to even be in the same room together, and Emmett and Alice had got into an argument about Jasper which ended badly, so they spent most of the day ignoring one another. Today was going to be our first appointment with the doctor. Esm and I were patiently waiting outside of Dr. Dover's office for the kids to arrive. I glanced at the clock again, and Esm gently placed her hand on my leg. They will be here, Carlyle, they gave you their word. Edward probably let Bella drive so it would take them longer to get here," she said with a knowing smile. "And knowing Emmett and Jasper, they have a bet on who can drive the slowest. Let's make sure we mention their little gambling obsession to Dr. Dover as well." I couldn't contain my laughter at that point, and neither could Esme. Our happy moment was interrupted by a loud bang as the double doors flew open, revealing 5 very annoyed vampires and 1 terrified human. "Hello, children. Are you ready for our appointment?" I asked, trying to muster up false enthusiasm. A number of growls came from the group. "Don't growl at your father. And remember, I expect you all to be on your best behavior when we walk in that door. Your father works in this hospital, please do not forget that." Esme looked at each and every one of their faces before she opened the door to the doctor's office. One by one they filed in the door, heads hung down toward the floor. I waited until they were all safely inside the office before I entered. Here goes nothing, I thought to myself. We were ushered into a large conference room with an oval-shaped table in the middle, surrounded by 12 chairs. The receptionist told us to make ourselves comfortable and the doctor would be with us in a minute. "What, no couches?" Alice asked, disappointed. "I thought we got to lay down and spill our guts." "I was hoping for a nap," Rosalie sneered. I took a deep breath and tried to calm myself. It was only going to get worse. Emmett got up and started reading the framed diplomas that hung on the wall. His face was examining one that I could tell from the design was Dr. Dover's medical licenses when suddenly he burst into hysterical laughter. A second later, Edward's normally reserved facade split into hysteria. Apparently he looked to see what Emmett found so amusing. "Would you two care to share what is so funny, or would you prefer to keep it a private joke?" I asked, sounding as uninterested as possible, hoping they would take the hint and settle down before the doctor walked in the room and committed us all. Emmett gasped for air before spitting out a few words. His name, Dr. Dover Benjamin, oh my gosh. At this point Bella and Jasper both exploded, which set off Emmett again. I glared at Edward and thought, what the hell is so funny, Edward? You guys are acting like 2-year-olds. Edward closed his eyes to regain his composure, knowing my patience was past its limit and we hadn't even seen the doctor yet. "Carlyle, his name is Benjamin Dover, get it?" Alice and Rosalie started howling, so they obviously did. Dr. Ben Dover. His parents must not have liked him very much, and with that, my normally composed son fell out of his chair. I looked at Esme, who was fighting very hard to not laugh herself at this moment. Shaking my head, I said, "Maybe we should leave, this is never going to work." I no sooner said the words when the door to the conference room flew open and Dr. Dover froze in the doorway, shocked at the scene before him. Edward was sprawled across the floor, Emmett was leaning on the wall laughing so hard all the diplomas and pictures were shaking. The girls all had their faces buried down in their arms on the table, and Jasper sat there clutching his sides, unable to speak. Mortified, I jumped to my feet and extended my hand. "Dr. Dover, thank you so much for seeing us. This is my wife Esme and these are our children, they're just a little nervous, I think." I mumbled, hoping to explain their bizarre behavior. Esme took control of the situation. "Children, please control yourselves so we can introduce you to Dr. Dover." Instantly, they all quieted down. Bella, however, was gasping for air from all her laughter, and her face was an incredibly bright shade of pink. The boys bit their lips and Alice clasped her hand over her mouth to calm her giggles. "Thank you," Esme said as she sat back down at the table. The children went around the table and introduced themselves to Dr. Dover, and all managed to keep their composure when he introduced himself to them, thank goodness. "So Carlyle, can you tell me, what made you decide to try family therapy?" Dr. Dover asked as he leaned across the table, interested. "Well, we have a very unusual situation in our family. Having adopted so many children around the same age has given us A unique set of issues. 5 teenagers under one roof for years, and all in relationships can make things stressful at times. We also have moved around a lot, which had added stress to the family, I'm sure. I felt like I had been rambling forever, so I glanced to Esme for help. We just think, if the children could talk a little about some of the things that are bothering them, clear the air if you will, then we can work on fixing our problems and moving forward. I guess that is why we are here, Doctor. Esme said with confidence. The children all refused to make eye contact with the doctor or each other, probably afraid they'd start laughing again. Dr. Dover cleared his throat as he finished jotting things down on his notepad. Okay, so let me see. If I understand the family dynamics, Rosalie and Jasper, you are twins? They both shook their heads yes. And Emmett, Edward, and Alice, you are siblings? Edward nodded for the three of them. Then Dr. Dover turned to Bella. And you, Bella, you are Edward's girlfriend? Bella of course blushed and quietly answered, yes. He jotted a few more items down before looking back at Bella. So Dr. Dover started, where should we begin? An innocent enough question for him to utter, however. I don't think he was expecting to see 5 fingers pointing at the same person. Edward. I told you this was a bad idea. Edward grumbled to Bella, who was the only person in the room who didn't point at Edward when Dr. Dover posed his question. Why did you all point at Edward when I asked that question? Dr. Dover asked curiously. His pen was poised to take notes based on their answers. Because they hate me. Edward said plainly, void of all emotion. Edward, we don't hate you. You just have issues, major issues, Edward. Alice chirped. And Alice, what do you feel Edward's issues are? Dr. Dover asked. Well, let's see, I am not a professional, but he has in the past had suicidal tendencies. He can be overbearing, he overreacts, he is a masochist, and he constantly refers to himself as a monster, just to name a few. Alice rattled off Edward's shortcomings without taking a breath. Don't forget sexually repressed, Emmett chimed in. Edward threw himself up from the table and was about to walk out the door. Yes, dear brother, I may be repressed, but you and your partner, however, are sexual deviants. Edward's eyes were as black as coal as he spoke. Bella ran to his side, trying her best to calm him down. Emmett, why do you always have to do that to him? You know it upsets him, and yet you never miss an opportunity to get your digs in. I hadn't seen Bella that upset at Emmett before. This wouldn't be good. Rosalie stood up. Don't you dare talk to my brother that way, you insignificant little girl. Rosalie edited her statement well, but Bella got the point. She was being insulted for being human again. Here goes, Edward. Apologize to her, Rose. Edward commanded. He of course stepped in front of Bella, assuming a protective stance. All the while, the doctor was writing furiously. Great, he was on the second page already. Come on guys, let's all relax. Jasper said as I started to get a fuzzy feeling in my stomach. Edward relaxed slightly, but then Bella leaned into him and laid a big kiss on him, taking him off guard. I saw Jasper snicker. Jasper Hale. Stop it now. I hissed. How could he do that? He calms the rest of us, but gets Bella all lusty in front of the doctor? How in the world was I going to explain that? Now Bella looked like a sexual deviant herself. Bella blushed new shades of red before running away from Edward and burying her face on the table. Edward, wanting to comfort her, went to be at her side and gently took her hand, never taking his eyes off of Jasper. I heard Dr. Dover's pencil slow down and turned to see his startled expression. Okay, that was quite an exchange, Edward. Since you were the center of it, do you mind if I ask a few questions about some of the things your sister just said? Dr. Dover asked cautiously. He could tell, if he pushed too hard, Edward would walk out and may never return. He was right about that. Please, Edward? Just give it a try, for me? I thought to myself. I heard Edward take a deep breath. What do you want to know? His voice was quieter than I had expected. Opening up would be the hardest for Edward out of all the children. Is it true you tried to commit suicide? Bella's head sprang up at the question, tears in her eyes. Yes. How long ago was it? 4 months give, or take a few days. Can you tell me what happened, what led up to it? Dr. Dover pressed. Bella's eyes were huge, and I saw her rubbing Edward's hand, watching him very closely. Edward looked at Rosalie and gave her a glare. God knows what she just put in her mind, and then I saw the corners of his mouth twitch ever so slightly. Edward, was all I was able to think before he spoke. It was all a misunderstanding. I am fine and have no intention of dying, ever. He was making jokes now? This was going to get bad. Edward never makes jokes. Edward, I find it hard to believe that you are perfectly fine after feeling so much despair that you would actually consider taking your own life. What made you want to kill yourself? With a fresh page of paper dedicated to Edward's suicide, he waited for an answer. Edward paused and Rosalie and Alice shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. The doctor picked up on their discomfort and jotted something down. Rosalie could no longer stand Edward's cool stare and blurted out it was all Bella's fault. She's the reason he tried to kill himself. Great, Bella gasped. Edward smiled, which was not the reaction I was expecting from him, and Alice shrieked, burying her head in Jasper's shoulder. Emmett just shook his head in Edward's direction as a warning. I'm sorry, it was my fault. It was all my fault. He tried to kill himself and I will never forget that. But I did go save him, Rosalie, remember? I was the one who brought him back in one piece. Bella said through her sobs. Edward? Dr. Dover looked closely at him, trying to read the expression on his face. Edward had the best poker face in the family. The doctor wasn't going to get any information that way unless Edward wanted to give it up. It was all a misunderstanding, like I said. I did try to kill myself, but it was because I thought Bella had died, and I wasn't going to live without her. He was being truthful, that was good. Again, the corners of his mouth twitched. He was probably reading the doctor's mind and preparing his next answer. So what was this misunderstanding you keep referring to? The doctor asked. My sisters lied to me and told me Bella was dead, so I guess it's their fault I tried to kill myself. Edward said so matter-of-factly, I wanted to strangle him. Bella's reaction was one of shock. Emmett, Jasper, Rosalie, and Alice were on their feet shouting at Edward, who sat calmly in his chair, smiling. He was actually smiling. The doctor's hands flew across the page as he tried to record the scene before him. He flipped furiously to a new page of notes. I think that made 7 by now. Esme's hand came up to her mouth as she turned to me and said, Carlisle, what were we thinking? If I wasn't already dead, I would definitely die of embarrassment right now. She whispered with a small smile on her face. Thank God for doctor-patient confidentiality. I teased. I looked up to see Alice standing on her chair waving her finger wildly at Edward. Did you forget that it was your fault that Bella was on that cliff to begin with? You're the one who left her heartbroken. Alice's words stung Edward and Bella both. They cringed together at the memory of that dark time when they were both so miserable. Edward, however, recovered quickly. Well, let's not forget the reason I left in the first place was because Jasper tried to kill her on her birthday, remember that? I was trying to keep her safe. Jasper became very solemn at the reminder of his slip. A wave of shame hit us all, causing each of them to take their seats and settle down. Bella reached across the table to take Jasper's hand. You know I forgave you for that, right? She was truly a special person. Edward was lucky to have her. Jasper gave her a small smile back and nodded her head. Relief now flooded the room as everyone let out a collective sigh and sat back in their chairs. Dr. Dover sat in a daze as he shook his hand out. It must have started cramping from all his notes. We sat silently as he looked back through them, making sure he got all the pertinent information down. So, I just want to make sure I got all this information right. 4 months ago, Edward tried to kill himself because he thought Bella died. This was a misinformation that both his sisters had told him, but they believed it to be true when they told him right. Everyone mumbled a quick yes. Bella somehow saved him, and they are happy now. And the reason Edward and Bella weren't happy back then was because Edward had left her to keep her safe after Jasper tried to kill her on her birthday. But Bella has forgiven him for that. Is that fairly accurate? Dr. Dover scanned the room awaiting our reaction. All 8 nodded in confirmation. The doctor took a deep breath and grabbed the telephone. Stephanie, cancel my next 3 appointments. This may take a while. Dr. Dover's paused. As I sat in the cafeteria eating my lunch, I glanced down at the piece of paper in front of me, scanning my schedule of appointments for this afternoon. One name in particular stood out to me, the Cullen family. Being new at the hospital, I didn't know Dr. Cullen very well, but during my first week, he had invited me to join him in the cafeteria on a few occasions, and he seemed very kind. During our lunches, he mentioned what was going on in his home, and I was somewhat honored when he asked me to see his family in therapy. I understood he had adopted a number of teenage children, which I found quite impressive considering how young he was. I assumed we were fairly close in age, and I couldn't imagine my wife and I having 5 teenagers running through the house. It was hard enough for us to remember to feed our dog and goldfish regularly. I hurried through lunch, wanting to have a few minutes to answer emails before I had my session with the Cullens. I hopped into the elevator and headed for my office when I saw Dr. Cullen and his wife, I assumed, sitting in the chairs down the hallway, looking quite nervous. I can imagine this was stressful for them, but I was confident I could help them work through their problems. I ducked in the back door to my office and saw my receptionist Stephanie engrossed in one of her books again. What are we reading today, Stephanie? Another romance novel? Is Fabio on the cover of this one too? I teased. Without even looking up from her book, she turned the page and replied, "No Fabio today, Dr. Dover, vampires this time." She said it with a smile and then buried her nose deeper into the book. Okay, well, after Dracula bites his latest victim, can you make sure you put Dr. Cullen and his family in the conference room? They will be here any minute, and there will be 8 of them all together. Dr. Cullen is coming here? Stephanie shrieked. She immediately dropped her book to the ground and started applying a fresh layer of makeup to her face. As I walked away, I saw her brushing her hair feverishly and throwing a piece of gum in her mouth. I guess someone has a crush. I hoped she wouldn't throw herself at him in front of his whole family. That would not be a good way to start our session, Mrs. Cullen. I apologize that my receptionist just threw herself at your husband when he walked through the door. I hope your children aren't scarred for the rest of their lives, so tell me all your problems. I was still chuckling to myself on the computer when I heard Stephanie showing them into the conference room. They were all very quiet. I could only hear Carlisle as they moved through the waiting room. I was finishing my last email when I heard laughter coming from the conference room. Walking out of my office, I glanced over at Stephanie, who just shrugged at the laughter that was now growing. They were fine when I left, she said innocently and quickly returned to her book. I heard a loud thud. I grabbed the crisp new file folder from the counter and a blank legal pad for my notes and headed for the conference room where I could hear roaring laughter now. What on earth is so funny in there? I thought to myself as I cautiously opened the door. Carlyle and his wife were sitting very formally in their chairs with a look of embarrassment on their faces as they looked at their children. One of the boys, who looked like a bodybuilder, was leaning against the wall laughing and shaking so violently I thought my diplomas were about to crash to the ground. Ask about steroids for that one, I thought to myself. Another one of the boys, who looked like he was the youngest, was lying on the ground hysterical. I assume he fell out of the empty chair next to him. That explains the thud I heard. The third boy was a lanky blonde who was clutching his sides and pointing at the big guy on the wall. All the girls had their heads buried on the table and were slapping the table as they laughed. The look on my face must have been something, because Dr. Cullen and his wife jumped up from their seats and rushed over to me. "Dr. Dover, thank you so much for seeing us. This is my wife Esmond. These are our children. They are just a little nervous, I think." Carlyle shook my hand and his wife did as well, giving me a warm smile. They both had the coldest hands I had ever felt. "I'd better get Stephanie to turn up the heat in here. I don't need the patients freezing to death." I made a mental note. "Children, please control yourselves so we can introduce you to Dr. Dover," Esm said so quietly, I was sure no one other than Carlyle and myself could hear her over all the laughter, but I was wrong. Instantly, they quieted and went back to their seats. One girl with long brown hair was trying to catch her breath, but the rest were silent, except for the smallest Cullen, who had her hand over her mouth trying to stifle her final giggles. Impressive. I thought to myself. They respect their mother, that's good. One less issue to deal with. The boy who had been on the floor introduced himself first. "Hello, Dr. Dover. My name is Edward Cullen, and this is my girlfriend Bella Swan." He extended his hand out to me, and again I was met with an extremely frigid hand. Strong grip, confident, didn't let his girlfriend introduce herself. Control issues, obviously. I noticed Edward's eyes change from lighthearted to serious quickly. Mood swings too, he sighed and leaned back in his chair as Bella shook my hand timidly. She hid her face behind her hair as some sort of protection as she blushed. Self-confidence issues, probably brought on by the overbearing boyfriend. Another scowl from Edward. Anger issues too, possibly bipolar. Next to introduce themselves was the smallest Cullen, who was now bouncing in her seat with excitement. "My name is Mary Alice Brandon Cullen, but you can call me Alice." She was a very high-energy person, I could tell by all the bouncing. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder possibly, with some impulse control issues as well. I wonder if she's ever been on medication for it. "Jasper Hale," was all the tall lanky blonde said, barely making eye contact with me. Emotionally withdrawn, possible depression, a man of few words. I glanced back at Edward, who I swear just snorted, but when I looked at him, he was perfectly composed, but his eyes weren't nearly as hostile as before. I shook my head and turned to the large boy sitting right next to me. He stood up and gave me a big hug. "Hey Doc. Emmett Cullen, damn glad to meet you. So do they have family wings in the loony bin?" His laughter boomed through the room. The rest of the Cullens sat open-mouthed at his comment. Impulse control, and no personal space boundaries. I wonder what he's hiding behind the humor? The last to introduce themselves was the beautiful blonde sitting next to Emmett. "Hi. Rosalie Hale." She mumbled without looking away from her reflection in the small mirror she had pulled out of her purse. "Vanity, self-absorbed, egocentric, your general center of the universe complex." A cough escaped Edward, which sounded a lot like a laugh, but when I glanced his way, he was examining his hand, which was intertwined with his girlfriend's on the tabletop. "Well, it is very nice to meet all of you. Thank you for coming. I guess I should introduce myself. I am Dr. Benjamin Dover, and I have been in private practice for 3 years. My wife and I moved here from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania 2 months ago, And so far I am enjoying things here in Forks. Carlisle was positioned at one end of the table, so I took the seat at the other head of the table, that way I could have a good view of the entire family as we spoke. I laid the folder on the table and made a few initial notes about who was who so I wouldn't forget. With my fresh legal pad poised and ready, I asked my first question. So Carlisle, can you tell me what made you decided to try family therapy? Carlisle and Esme both explained the uniqueness of their situation and how they hoped in having the children open up about what was bothering them, they could then resolve some issues and move forward as a family. I was truly impressed by the love in their voices as they spoke about their children. I furiously jotted notes as they spoke. When they finished, I wanted to get the adoptive situation figured out. So Rosalie and Jasper, you are twins? They both nodded in agreement. And Emmett, Edward and Alice, you are siblings, Edward answered for all of them. My attention turned to the girl with the long brown hair who was nervously clutching Edward's hand. And Bella, you are Edward's girlfriend? Her face immediately turned red at my question, and I heard her quietly answer yes. I wrote the information out on the legal pad before continuing. I wondered to myself why Edward's girlfriend was included in the initial visit. They had all remained so quiet. I wanted to put a question out there that might spark a conversation or perhaps argument just to see what would happen. So, where should we begin? No one uttered a single word, but 5 fingers immediately pointed in the same direction, right at Edward. Not surprising, really. I thought to myself. Edward turned to Bella, who of course hadn't pointed at Edward. The first told you this was a bad idea. His face was somewhere between furious and mortified. Trying to take the focus off of Edward for a moment, I asked, why did you all point to Edward when I said that? They all seemed to be watching Edward intently, as if waiting for him to explode. Because they hate me. Edward said without any emotion in his voice. Great, he's shutting down. A defense mechanism for sure. Did he really feel like they hated him? Like he was the odd man out. Edward, we don't hate you, you just have issues, major issues. The very hyper Alice chirped. Well, this could be interesting. Alice, what do you feel Edward's issues are? Edward feels persecuted by his family, and his sister is ready to throw him under the bus first, so let's see where this goes. Well, I'm not a professional, but he has in the past had suicidal tendencies. He can be overbearing, he overreacts, he is a masochist, and he constantly refers to himself as a monster, just to name a few. She rattled without taking a breath. Suicidal? I can see that, he appears to be very tightly wounded. I had already picked up on the overbearing and the overreacting, the self-loathing, a masochist. Maybe this is why Bella is here after all. Don't forget sexually repressed. His brother Emmett happily chimed in. I scribbled furiously but stopped when I heard Edward throw himself up from the table and head for the door. Yes, dear brother, I may be repressed, but you and your partner, however, are sexual deviants. He put great emphasis on the word partner. Ask Emmett about his girlfriend and their sexual relationship. I wrote in my notepad. Bella ran to Edward's side and put her hand lovingly on his arm. Emmett, why do you always have to do that to him? You know it upsets him, and yet you never miss an opportunity to get your digs in. Bella spoke her mind. That was good to know. She must feel really comfortable around the Cullens to take on Emmett that way. The blonde, Rosalie, stood up. Don't you dare talk to my brother that way, you insignificant little girl. There was a great deal of anger behind Rosalie's words. It was peculiar the way she emphasized the words brother and girl as if they had double meanings. Rosalie and Emmett, close bond. I wrote in my notepad. Apologize to her, Rose. Edward snarled. Edward and Rosalie explosive relationship, I jotted down. I don't think I had ever filled pages so fast, only 5 minutes after introductions. The ultra-quiet Jasper finally spoke more than his name. Come on guys, let's all relax. I still couldn't figure out how it happened, but any tension I had been feeling as this argument escalated was gone. That was weird, I thought to myself. So I was completely distracted when Bella suddenly threw herself at Edward and started kissing him passionately in the middle of the room. I could tell by Edward's expression he was taken off guard. The rest of the Cullens simply watched wide-eyed. Is she a sex addict? I will put her down for some definite impulse control problems until I learn more. I continued scribbling my questions and suspicions down for a few minutes. Bella had snapped out of whatever had taken control of her and was visibly embarrassed. Edward had returned to the table, trying to comfort her but still glaring at the once again silent Jasper. Jasper troublemaker, okay, that was quite an exchange, Edward, since you were the center of it, do you mind if I ask a few questions about some of the things your sister just said? I tried to tread very lightly, I sensed he was still ready to walk out at any second. I heard Edward take a deep breath. What do you want to know? His voice was barely above a whisper. I decided to start with the most important issue Alice brought up. Is it true you tried to commit suicide? Bella of course reacted by looking up, tears in her eyes. Yes. Again his voice was emotionless, like I just asked what 2 plus 2 equaled. How long ago was it? 4 months give or take a few days, only 4 months ago. No wonder they all pointed at him when I asked where to start. Can you tell me what happened, what led up to it? I watched his reaction very carefully. His eyes went from Bella to Rosalie, and he began glaring at her. What part had Rosalie played in his suicide attempt? Did her center of the universe complex put him into a depression? She must have some part in it. By the was he's glaring at her, wait, did she just smile? It was all a misunderstanding. I am fine and I have no intention of dying, ever. Interesting reaction, hadn't heard it referred to as a misunderstanding in a while, mistake yes, misunderstanding not as much. And he's going to live forever? And like Peter Pan never grow up too, I'm sure. Major denial, thinking he's fine, Edward, I find it hard to believe that you are perfectly fine after feeling so much despair that you would actually consider taking your own life. What made you want to kill yourself? I flipped to a fresh page in my notepad for his response. Edward paused and looked at his sisters. They both shifted in their seats. Sisters played some role in Edward's suicide. Enablers? Causes? Investigate further. I scribbled on my pad. Surprisingly, it was Rosalie who answered the question. It was all Bella's fault. She's the reason he tried to kill himself. Guilty conscience for Rosalie, she's definitely involved somehow. Edward's girlfriend started sobbing at the accusation. Alice hid her face on Jasper's arm. Close relationship, Alice and Jasper. Emmett sat up taller in his chair and shook his head at Edward as some kind of warning. He apparently was as protective of his sister as she was of him. I could see Carlisle and Esme tense up in their seats at Rosalie's words. His suicide is still a very touchy subject, I'm sorry, it was my fault. It was all my fault he tried to kill himself, and I will never forget that. But I did go save him, Rosalie, remember? I was the one who brought him back in one piece. She went to save him? Where exactly did she go? Edward? I asked when I couldn't treat him. I didn't know if he was angry he had been stopped, or if he blamed Bella for everything. He still hasn't said why he tried to kill himself. What drove him to that length? I wondered to myself. It was all a misunderstanding, like I said. I did try to kill myself, but it was because I thought Bella had died, and I wasn't going to live without her. He thought Bella was dead? Was she also suicidal? Murder-suicide perhaps. I felt my hand start writing down every word he said. So what was this misunderstanding you keep referring to? I prodded. My sisters lied to me and told me Bella was dead, so I guess it's their fault I tried to kill myself. His sisters lied to him about Bella being dead? They must really hate him. The room exploded after Edward's accusation. His siblings were on their feet, shouting at him. Bella looked like she just saw a three-headed monster, and Esme and Carlyle had their heads pressed together deep in conversation. Edward, however, sat back and grinned. This family does need help. Look at them, I thought. My hand flew across the paper recording all their reactions. Page after page, I jotted notes on who was defending who and what they accusing one another of. Tiny Alice leapt onto her chair and grabbed my attention. She was waving her finger at Edward and shouting. Did you forget that it was your fault that Bella was on that cliff to begin with? You're the one who left her heartbroken. Bella was on a cliff? Is that where she saved Edward from? And why did he leave her heartbroken? They looked fine to me right now, very much together. I did see the pain and anguish that were on Bella and Edward's faces as they were reminded of being apart. They looked physically ill at the memory. Codependent. I thought victoriously in my head. That's it, they're very codependent. Edward, however, recovered quickly. Well, let's not forget the reason I left in the first place was because Jasper tried to kill her on her birthday, remember that? I was trying to keep her safe. Did he just say, Jasper tried to kill her? I screamed in my mind. Am I looking at the face of a murderer? And why are they all so calm about it? How many murderers do they know that this is no big deal? I froze, with my pen touching the paper in front of me. If Edward saying the words wasn't strange enough, what happened next was utterly flabbergasting. You know I forgave you for that, right? Bella reached across the table and took Jasper's hand in hers. He looked into her eyes, nodded, and smiled. She forgave him for trying to kill her? Forgave him? Is she the most forgiving person on the planet or a complete moron? Now who's the masochist? My hand was starting to cramp from all the notes I had in front of me. I was sure I got some of it wrong. I was hoping I did, because if not, this was easily the most dysfunctional family I had ever encountered in my limited years in practice. I may need to look into the family wing like Emmett had asked. I regained my composure before speaking. So, I just want to make sure I got all this information right. 4 months ago, Edward tried to kill himself because he thought that Bella had died. This was a mistake that both of his sisters passed on to him because at the time they believed it to be true. Everyone mumbled a quick yes. Okay, I can live with that part of it, we could work on those things. Another deep breath. Bella somehow saved him, and they are happy now. And the reason Edward and Bella weren't happy back then was because Edward had left her to keep her safe after Jasper tried to kill her on her birthday. But Bella has forgiven him for that. Is that fairly accurate? I scanned the room, waiting for someone to correct me. Waiting. I almost threw up when I saw all 8 heads nodding in confirmation. I grabbed the telephone. Stephanie, cancel my next 3 appointments, this may take a while. That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of AU fan fictions. Looking forward to having you on board again.